Dear friends, welcome to the next session for software engineering and designing concepts. In today's session, we will be dealing with classical waterfall model, which is the first life cycle model that has been discussed in our previous session. So let's get started. Classical waterfall model can be divided into 6 different phases: feasibility study, requirement analysis and specification, design, coding and unit testing, integration and system testing, and maintenance. So, if we represent the classical waterfall model in a diagrammatic form, we will have feasibility study followed by requirement analysis, followed by design, coding, and once coding is complete, you will carry out the testing and maintenance. It is the simplest and the most intuitive development style where intuition is mostly used as an exploratory style of development. Even though this model is very easy to understand, and if we understand this model properly, it becomes easy for us to understand the other models. Still, this model is more of an idealistic model as it is not really used in real projects, and we will discuss this why. So why this is basically known as a waterfall model? Because after each phase, the next phase follows, which gives a step-by-step representation of the entire life cycle, which is or which resembles a waterfall in the real life scenario. So if we look at this plot, which is the relative effort versus the design phases or the software lifecycle phases plot, we will find out that among all the life cycle phases, the maintenance phase actually requires the maximum effort because the development might complete within a couple of months, but the maintenance goes on for years together, and for almost every software, the maintenance requires much more effort than the development effort. The development phases are those phases which are between your feasibility study and the maintenance phase. And among the development phases, the testing phase typically consumes the maximum effort. If we plot the effort graph for a typical project, we will see that the maintenance requires much more effort, followed by the testing phase as shown in this plot. Thus, the development phases, testing phase requires the largest effort, followed by coding, then design, and finally ending with requirement specification. The classical waterfall model or any other model used to document such a model must not only have the diagrammatic representation but also have a definite entry and exit criteria. As discussed in the previous session, the entry and exit criteria associated with each phase will help us not only to complete each phase successfully but also to prevent the 99% complete syndrome problem. Now, every organization has their own set of methodologies for software development, and these organizations expect the fresh engineers to master the organizational software development methodology so that it becomes easier for the entire team to work in sync with each other. Now, most organizations generally has standards on the outputs or deliverables produced at the end of every phase, which is also known as the entry and exit criteria for every phase. Entry and exit criteria associated with every phase helps us to overcome the 99% complete syndrome problem, which might lead to the failure of an entire project in the worst case scenario. To begin with the first phase, which is the feasibility study phase, it is classified into three major dimensions. The first being the technical feasibility, the second one is the economic feasibility, and the third one is the schedule feasibility. We also do a cost benefit analysis related to the entire project during the feasibility study phase itself. Now let's look at exactly how this feasibility study can be carried out. The first thing is to roughly understand the requirements of the software and the customer requirements. For example, what are the features of the software which comprises of different sorts of data or the data volume? the processing that needs to be done, and finally the code to be written, or what is the output to be produced by the system, and various constraints and behavior of the system. Considering an example, whether the backup needs to be kept, or whether the downtime requirement is very high, or whether the data to be input from different locations of the company. So these are some of the different constraints. Once the constraints are understood, then the project manager would like to execute it. As per the proposed alternate solution, we'll also need to find out the cost for its solution. Do the cost benefit analysis and check whether it is schedule wise it is technically feasible, and find out the best solution and discuss with the customer and determine whether to execute or abandon the project. Now the question is, after doing so much of things, or after doing so much of research and hard work, why at all do we need to abandon a project? Just to summarize, the first thing during feasibility study is to understand the work and the features required. What are the data and how will be the input? What is the processing time and the constraints, etc. Once a rough understanding of the requirements is done, we will find out what are the best ways to solve it, as there can be many alternate solutions. So we will examine the cost implications of different solutions and find out the best solution present. If everything goes fine and is acceptable to the officials, the project manager will take a go decision, and the high level solution that has been defined will be used by the developers, and the development will proceed in that particular style. But the answer to the question of why abandoning a project comes where there might be a situation where technical competence is not there with the company, or maybe the timeline by which the company needs it would be difficult to meet, and hence the project manager might have to take a no-go decision or drop the project then and there. The next phase is the requirement analysis and specification phase. The main aim of this phase is to understand the exact requirements of the customer and then analyze the requirements. And after it is understood and analyzed, it is finally documented. We can also consider this documentation of requirement analysis and specification as the exit criteria for this particular phase. There are two major activities which are carried out, the first being requirement gathering and analysis, and the second part is the requirement specification. Talking about requirement gathering and analysis, the main aim of this part is to collect all the related data from the customer and analyze this data to clearly understand the customer requirements. Here, the developers will also try to find out the inconsistencies and incompleteness in the requirement and resolve them. Now, after the data is being collected or gathered, it is also analyzed. Now, how do we gather this relevant data? It can be done by various interviews and discussion sessions with the end users or the customers. For example, for a business accounting software, we have to interview all the accountants of the organization to find out their requirements, because each of the person working in that particular organization will have different roles and responsibilities by which they carry out their activities, and all of them should be present as features in our project or software. The next part being requirement specification. So after all the data is collected and incompleteness and inconsistencies are found out and resolved, we have to remove the ambiguities and contradictions that might be present in the data after identifying them. And finally, after these ambiguities and contradictions are also removed, we have to document the requirements into a particular document which is known as software requirement specification document. So this SRS document is extremely important from the perspective of completion of this particular phase as well. Engineers which generally perform or do this particular phase or carry out the discussions related to the requirement gathering and analysis are generally designated as analysts. The third important phase is the design phase, where it transforms the SRS or the software requirements in a form which is suitable for implementation in some programming language. So basically we will be deriving the software architecture from the SRS document in this particular phase. So design has two different approaches, the first being the traditional approach and the second one is the object oriented approach. In traditional approach, there are two major activities which are carried out. The first activity is the structured analysis and is primarily dependent upon the various phases or various processes and the data being exchanged amongst them. The next activity is the structured design. Now, talking about structured analysis, we have to identify all the functions to be performed or the processes to be performed and also the data flow among the different processes. And then we have to carry out the operations related to the functions and the data using the data flow diagrams. Now we have to decompose each of the functions recursively into subfunctions. So we have to go on decomposing the functions into subfunctions until and unless the functions or the processes can no longer be decomposed, and identifying the data flow among the subfunctions as well. And this identification of the functions, subfunctions and the data flow amongst them would be represented using a data flow diagram. So we will discuss about data flow diagram when we will be doing the design phase in detail. After the structured analysis, the next step is to carry out the structured design. Now structured design has again two major activities involved, which is the architectural design or the high level design, and the next one is the detailed design or the low level design. In high level design, the entire system is divided into modules and we will be representing the invocation relationships among the modules. That means which module is dependent upon which module, or which module is a sub module of the parent module, etc. In the low level design, the different modules are designed in a greater detail, which has data structures and algorithms for each of the module. So basically, both architectural design and detailed design will be associated in carrying out the structured design process, where initially it will be divided into modules and the dependency between both or all the modules are defined, and after that it is the detailed design is carried out, where the modules are designed in a greater detail by associating data structures and algorithms for each of them. Moving ahead to the object-oriented design of the design phase, it is again for the previous design is again categorized or worked with greater detail, where identification of various objects, that is real world entities, would be done, and we will be identifying the relationship among the different objects which will be a part of the system. For example, the objects in a payroll software may be employees, managers, payroll register, departments, etc. So once this entire objects are identified for a particular software, the relationships are also identified. After these objects are identified, it is generally converted into an object structure in order to refine or obtain a detailed design. Now this object-oriented design has some advantages over your traditional approach design or over your traditional design, which has because it has lower development effort, lower development time and better maintainability. So moving ahead, again the exit criteria for this design phase would be a design document, where the developers or the designers would be documenting the design that they have already carried out using any of the approaches, and after it is been documented in that design document, we will consider that the exit criteria for the design phase is complete. So the next phase is implementation, which is also known as coding and unit testing phase. So in implementation, it is the primary responsibility of the developers would be to convert the design that has been completed in the design phase into a program using any of the programming language and test it in a smaller scale or do the unit testing. So as already mentioned, the main purpose is to translate the software design into a source code, and each of the module of the design is coded in this particular phase. After this module is each of the module is coded, after completion of every module, each module is unit tested. That means it is tested independently as a standalone unit and debugged. After this is done, each of the module is again documented along with its input and output, as well as different processing that is involved. So you can consider unit testing as the compiling stage in your any of the C programs. So when you compile, basically you get all sorts of errors that might be there in that particular module, and once you get those errors, you might go ahead with debugging them and making a note of it as and when it comes. So basically this is the unit testing. The purpose of unit testing is to test if the individual modules work correctly, and the end product of the implementation phase is a set of program modules that has been tested individually. So the exit criteria would be basically a document which would be consisting of the program modules as well as the testing of as well as the unit testing results of each of the modules. So once this implementation is carried out, the next phase is the integration and system testing. So in the previous phase itself, we have carried out the standalone testing, which is known as the unit testing. So once all the modules are unit tested, they are integrated in a planned manner. Generally, all of the modules are not integrated at one go. Modules are integrated through a number of steps, and during each integration step, the partially integrated system is tested. For example, in this slide, you can see M1, M2, M3 and M4 are 4 different modules. So once M1 is complete and is unit tested, it will be integrated with M2. So once M1 and M2 are integrated, it will again be tested for any of the problems that might be coming due to the integration. So after M1 and M2 has been successfully integrated, then M3 is integrated with M1 and M2. So step by step, all the modules would be integrated, and step by step the entire system will be tested for any sort of inconsistency or any problem that might be arising due to integration. After all the modules have been successfully integrated and tested and the result is successful, system testing is carried out. The main aim of system testing is to ensure that the developed system functions according to the requirements as specified in the SRS document. So it might be so that the integrated system might not work properly in a particular environment or might not have certain features. So the main aim of the system testing would be to identify if there are any such limitations or disadvantages associated to that particular software in context to the already developed software requirement specification document. So SRS document is of utmost importance because depending on SRS document, the design, coding and unit testing as well as integration and system testing is done, or it is dependent on. So the last phase after the integration and system testing is carried out is the maintenance phase, and maintenance of any software product requires much more effort than the effort to develop the product itself. We already saw this in the plot or in the graph that described relative effort along with the different phases of life cycle model. The development effort to maintenance effort is typically 40:60 ratio. So this maintenance stage can be classified into three different activities. The first activity being the corrective maintenance, where the errors would be corrected, and these errors correlates to those errors which were not discovered during the product development phases. It might be to anything related to adaptability or scalability of the software. The next one is perfective maintenance, which improves the implementation of the system and enhances functionalities of the system. And the third one is the adaptive maintenance, which will port the software to a new environment, example a new computer or to a new operating system. So I think this is self-explanatory, where all these activities or all these steps, which is corrective, perfective and adaptive maintenance steps, would help the developers as well as the other software programmers to maintain the software in whichever possible way it is required to be maintained. That means not all software requires all the maintenance activities, corrective, perfective and adaptive. Some of the softwares might need just the corrective maintenance, some of them might need just the perfective, and some of them might need just the adaptive maintenance. So depending upon the requirements of the maintenance strategy, the developers would be choosing one of the maintenance criteria in order to maintain the software. So these are the different steps of software life cycle model, which corresponds to the classical waterfall model. Now there are certain problems associated to classical waterfall model which do not allow this model to be used practically in various industries and organizations. However, it still serves to be an ideal model for most of the cases. The first problem being inflexible partitioning of the project into distinct stages, which means that the partitioning or the different phases that has been designed in this particular waterfall model or designed in this particular model are very rigid, and they do not entertain any sort of flexibility between the activities, or the programmers or the developers cannot go back to the previous activity if they have missed out on any of the previous steps, and they have to proceed to the next phase without completing the previous step, which might lead to the entire project failure. It makes it difficult to respond to changing customer requirements and can be used appropriately only when all the requirements are well understood. So in the very first stage itself, we cannot give a scope, or we cannot leave a scope, or we cannot leave it incomplete. The requirement analysis and specification and the feasibility study is extremely important in this particular model, because if we leave any scope, or if there are any information that has been missed out, we cannot go back and rectify that particular problem, or we cannot go back and add that particular feature into our system. We have to deliver the product without that particular feature, or if the customer wants a new feature to be added, we cannot add it at a later stage. Everything needs to be well understood, complete and consistent in the very beginning itself. So sometimes it might be so that we might not only the developers, the end users or the client or the customers might also miss out on giving certain information. However, this situation is not entertained in this particular model. These disadvantages or this disadvantage would be tackled in our next life cycle model, which is the iterative waterfall model, and we will be discussing in detail as to how the loopholes or the drawbacks of classical waterfall model can be overcome in the next subsequent models, life cycle models. So that is all for today. Thank you.